Good afternoon to you all again. Welcome to our latest Local Authority Insight series in association with lawyers and local government. I'm delighted to bring this presentation with two very experienced panels, both past presidents of LLG. It'll be a live and engaging conversation. Everything you wanted to know about being a monitoring officer but were afraid to ask. So introductions to our esteemed panelists. Probably don't need any, as many of you will know them. Phil McCourt is recently joined Bevan Britton LLP to provide advice on local authority governance and monitoring officer issues. He's a chartered secretary as well as being a solicitor by training, having joined local government in 1988, first becoming a monitoring officer and member of the corporate leadership team in 2000. He has worked in and for a number of local authorities, most recently as monitoring officer and director of legal at the Wirral Metropolitan Borough Council, finishing up there in September of this year. Suki Binjal is a highly experienced public sector solicitor providing legal and strategic advice to local authorities and other public bodies, and is currently the interim monitoring officer at Northumberland County Council. Her previous roles have included the Director of Legal, Corporate Governance and HR at the London Borough of Lewisham, and a directorship with the Commission for Racial Equality. She was also the external advisor on the policy committee with the SRA for 8 years and sits on the Law Society Council representing lawyers and local government. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the very capable hands of Phil and Suki to enjoy the conversation. Sit back and enjoy the fireworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay.
So what we thought we would do is split it into these three parts, folks, and kind of do little intros to them for some very few notes that we've got written down, and then to bounce off each other. We decided this morning, for our own benefit, to look up in the dictionary what monitoring officer actually means. We came up with two versions. I've got, you sit behind me, gifted to me by a predecessor, a really old pocket Oxford. And that comes up with monitor or monitoring as a senior pupil in a school with duties of keeping order and a pupil given specified duties in class, which I guess in many instances describes us rather well. And goes on to talk about television monitors and monitoring transmitted signals and surveillance over foreign government stuff, but ends up as a definition of giving all and serving as a warning. So that perhaps does sum us up in a way and where this all came from. Suki looked things up in a modern dictionary and came up with various definitions of nursing care.
Yeah, nursing care, specialist, palliative care. There was, yeah, it was probably actually what we do during the day, you know, very much a caring, nurturing role. But we'll talk a little bit more about where we think the term monitoring officer should go, I think, towards the end.
Yes, so to take our tongue out of our cheeks, it is worth having a think about what the role is, but then also where it came from, because it really starts back with the Poulston affair in the 70s. And if we go way back into history, there was actually a court case in the 30s where the question was, what should the clerk to the council do when the council is going to do something unconscionable? And the simple answer of the court was that the gentleman, because obviously it was all men then presumed, should just resign. That's it. There was no other sort of thought about it, or people need to pay their mortgage or anything like that. And indeed, that's exactly what Rodney Brooke did. If we fast forward into the 90s, when he came up against a leader in the form of Shirley Porter, who had ousted the old patrician class of politicians, and she and what were called the garagistas, that particular political wing at the time, took over. And he's got a lovely phrase that has become my favourite of this week, which is that after working in his previous authority with politicians who were pleasant and clever, it came as a shock to work with someone who was both unpleasant and stupid. And that sometimes also describes our life. So it started there. We then had all the issues on the other end of the political spectrum with Derek Hatton and others, where the view of the day was that the clerk at Liverpool at the time was really driven to an early grave through all of that. So there was, in the mid-80s, the Widdicombe report looking at how local authorities should run. It was actually discussed as the inner workings of local authorities, out of which came a number of things, including political balance, enforcing it rather than it being merely culture. And in that were a couple of quite heavy recommendations. One was to underscore this tradition in local authorities that we work for the authority, regardless of political colour. Even if there's a 100% majority or 99% with just one opposition member, we work for the authority, not simply who's in charge. And then that later on underscored in the ECHR discussion. Ahmed, if anyone wants to look it up, it's really good. But then behind that, the idea of the 151 officer having a set of powers, which was rushed in the 88 Act, and then we followed in the 89 Act with this concept of having a personal duty to report on any breach or in the rule of law, which would give that backup for clerks to step forward in front of members in a very public sphere and stand up publicly and feel they were supported in saying what you're doing is wrong. So that was seen as the answer. At the time, there was this question of what should it be called? And the reason for the monitoring officer thing is that at the time, there was still this, I guess, hangover fuzziness between the senior lawyer and the clerk to the council, who traditionally, of course, always were lawyers. So it was kind of assumed. So it was given to that person, to the chief exec. And then what happened over the next dozen years is that we realised, actually, with a whole new class of leaders who were generalists and good managers and good leaders, but didn't have any background in governance, that some of the naughty things that were going on, and we'll come to that one especially for Suki's recent experience, some of those naughty things that were going on and the conflicts were actually around the chief executive. And so on the back of the Nolan report, what happened in 2000 is that that role got taken off the head of paid service. It's now, as we all know, the law that you can't be both MO and head of paid service, and got given as a freestanding role. So we get to where we are now, along with that 2000, that bringing in all of the issues around standards and behaviour as a tack on, which led the Audit Commission to referring to our role as one of the most awkward and difficult in the new constitutional settlement, standing between council and the executive and saying, well, no, hang on a minute, where does this fit on the divide? What's the meaning of this? So, this role has been very much thrust into that full political light. And then, of course, we had great Uncle Eric Pickles come along and decide to tinker with it all, water down the protections that came with that duty, and start throwing things around such as, we don't need a chief executive because the leader of the council is the chief executive, and the leader of the council should chair all management meetings and direct staff and all of that sort of stuff, which I think we've recovered from, but in some places and for some time really did muddy the waters. What do you think, Suki?
Definitely, and I think the rocky road that we've, the last 10, sort of 15 years of austerity has also, I think, diluted the role of the monitoring officer, where there's cuts that need to be made as well, Phil. I think, that making it a third tier has actually really, I think, local authorities have suffered. We've seen that from the recent public interest reports. I think what Eric Pickles had thought was that, you know, politicians would manage themselves and the ballot box would manage poor behaviour, you know, and of that school of thought, you know, which actually some of us that do the job, you know, on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure some of us that are in the audience know that that doesn't actually happen, you know, and you know, it is very difficult to manage some of that poor behaviour that happens, you know, and hence, you know, the things that you wanted to know to be a monitoring officer and afraid to ask. So please do ask us. You know, I you know, just want to spend a little bit of time, you know, just to say my experience hasn't been traditional. Phil, as you know, I haven't come through, you know, sort of a, you know, sort of a 15, 20 year at one local authority and then move to another. I'm very much of the person that actually moves, and I'm very creative in order to get to the top seat. Well, I was. So my last job, I was a deputy monitoring officer, which I'm sure some of you are, which incidentally, just so you all know, isn't actually a statutory role. I have come across lots of authorities that say, oh, and we have appointed X as a deputy monitoring officer, particularly some authorities that haven't got a monitoring officer and they think they can appoint a DMO. You know, that role isn't recognised in law. It's the monitoring officer, and it's the monitoring officer's gift to appoint a deputy monitor, and they should. It's good practice to do that. And some authorities, 1 or 2. I've had sometimes 3 in some of the authorities, depending on the challenges, you know, and you know what's the issue of the day. So I just wanted to make that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I do think there is. No, I was just going to say that there is a real misunderstanding in places as to what the role actually is, you know, that, and that's a great example of the deputy monitoring officer is a post that only exists in the absence of the monitoring officer, and so we've got where we come out with is 4, well see what Suki says, but for me 4 roles of the monitoring officer, you know, those first 2 being the statutory ones. So to report, the personal duty to report to council when, you know, I, as the monitoring officer, nobody else, thinks there has been, or likely to be, that's the really important bit, likely to be a breach in rule of law. And that means we have to speak our versions of truth unto power, both to our members and also to officers, and that leads to some very uncomfortable conversations that requires patience and forbearing on their part for us to be able to get them to the place where they need to be. Also a great adrenaline buzz, I have to say.
Well, it depends which side you're on, Phil.
Yeah, the second is that, you know, we're now the people lumped with this label of member conduct.
Yeah.
And, you know, takes us into that place of us determining whether or not somebody's investigated. And we've all got lots of examples of those that range from, in my case, a councillor who was accused by our own auditors of false accounting and potential theft. Yeah. I know there's councils that have various, you know, thoughts like that, through to councillors who just don't understand conflicts of interest, or frankly don't want to understand, and you know, and civility.
Yeah. But I do think, Phil, that, you know, we're moving on to the part of the role, you know, and as I was saying, you know, I do, you know, for the last 10 years, I've run my own, you know, as an interim, my own company, because, you know, you work hard to get to the top table, and sometimes you get to the top table and the behaviours at that top table are not akin to your own, and there are some poor behaviours, and those poor behaviours from senior leadership team to senior elected members, you know, and you can make choices, you know, you can actually enter into the world that I entered into and have interim work, which is really rewarding in the sense you can have assignments, you can work with the different local authorities, you can, you actually can pick up projects, you can reorganise legal services. There's a whole area, a whole host of work. I mean, we finally will end up where we think the future of the MO runs to, and I think I'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about that. But I think at the moment, the skills that you need to be an MO in these challenging austerity times, because we have got lots of challenging times ahead of us. Budgets aren't going to what's the word, Phil? I want balance. There are local authorities that already are saying we cannot make our budgets, our books balance, and they will be looking to their statutory officers for some guidance. And I think that's where it's really important that the MO and the 151 and the head of paid service work together. The troubles that I have seen is where those three officers have not worked together, or they aren't able to work together because there's a tension between the chief executive, who usually is the head of paid service, or the 151. Some cases the MO will report to the 151, and all of that matters when it does come to exercising, or you're minded to exercise, your statutory power. The last few authorities that I've been in, I have minded to do that, but I haven't done that on my own. We have had the conversation, and actually there is a duty to consult. And I'm harping on about this a lot because that is one of the challenges that I have found, and I'm sure Phil you have, is that if you're working in isolation, then you are alone. And it can be a very lonely position. But if you work together, you are strength in numbers, as the statutory roles. And I think that's what the statute intended. Be the keeper of finance, be the keeper of resource, be the keeper of law administration. And I think that's really important to remember. And I think the other thing, to remember is that the ethical framework, the member conduct, is a minor part. It's not actually all of the job. The governance part is really crucial, for us to understand the governance framework.
So I think the message for us to get over is that this is, in my view at least, a 4-part role. So we've just discussed briefly there the first two, those two statutory ones. The third one is as general counsel to the authority, and we'll come on to it. And of course, that's not just running a legal department or being the traditional lawyer. If you're in that position in larger authorities, there'll be a separate head of legal anyway. But it is to be that most senior person in that role, and that's not just defending litigation, bringing prosecutions, negotiating commercial contracts, but it's about the governance and inner workings. So it's about being in the mix of it and saying, how do we get things done? Not, arrive on day 99 of a 100-day journey with someone with their optimism blinkers on saying, this is what I want. Could you just run your eye over it, please?
Yeah.
And the other part, and again, we'll come back to it when we talk about the role as really, if we were in the private sector, this would be general counsel and company secretary, being seen as the conscience of the authority. And then the fourth role is simply as being someone at the top table. So they are a manager and leader in their own right, and got a full voice at that. And you touched on it there, Suki, which is about where someone should be at the top table or not. So in my view, and I've been offered or interviewed for jobs and found out that the role does not have a permanent seat around that top table. And my response is, well, if my job is to do all of those four things, starting with, I need to know what the rule of law, what's going on so I can check it against the rule of law. If I'm to be the deliverer who can stop problems happening before they start, I need to know what's going on.
Absolutely,
and to get you there. Yeah. And if I'm not at that top table, then I can't do that role. Well, so, not playing.
I think, there's a difference between being at the top table and having access to the top table. Sometimes, you can be in a smaller authority where perhaps, you do answer, you do report to a director of corporate resources, or you do report, to a second tier or a third tier officer, and everybody will be different. All local authorities will have different tiers. They will understand their own banding, but I think having access to the chief executive, reporting to the chief executive, being there when those decisions are being made is really crucial. And that's what gets us to be, that make the difference, to be solution focused. You can't be a solution focused legal team or monitoring officer if you don't understand what's happening at the top. And inevitably, the officers will come to you at the end when they've decided this is what they want to do something, and they formulated some policy, or they want to make some decision, and then we are tarnished with being the blockers. And I think that's really important for us to remember, that in order for us to be solution focused, creative, and not the blockers, we need access to that top table. And we really do have to be, party to decisions being made. We don't necessarily need to sit at it, but can I just, sorry, Anne, before you move in, because I think you're going to tell us some questions, is that I think parity of esteem at the top table is really important. So if your authority says, oh, yes, you sit at the top table, you want to know, actually, what is my role at that top table? Do I have any frontline services? Do I actually are they all back office? Are my colleagues at the top table going to be looking at me thinking, you're not an executive director or corporate director? And I think that's really important, Phil, and I think that's the culture of the organisation, to create that parity.
It is very much, and I've been part of an authority where they had those two tiers of directors, exec and non-exec, but the point is, I didn't care, because when the discussions and decisions were being made, I was at the table, and therefore knew what was going on in people's heads. So I wasn't just given, and this is a genuine example of where I fell out with the chief executive, to make it minor, where I gave legal advice, and that chief exec said that's not what I wanted to say, so I recast it, and then finally the chief exec said no, that isn't what I wanted to say. So over the weekend I've written what I wanted to say, here you are, this is what I want you to say. At which point I went, no, it doesn't work like that. So sorry, what we'll do, we'll come on to what resources we think we do need to do the job at the top table. But you've got some questions, and I did notice popping up that in Wales it is slightly different. But actually the concepts aren't that different about that role of the MO as general counsel and being having access to the people that count.
And I saw that Derek has put a question up about, is there any particular, are you going to go in order, Anne? Shall I just read Derek's one? I've just seen Derek's.
That's fine, yeah. Just to say, Stephen, I have seen your question. I'm going to leave it to the very end, if that's okay. And then you deal with Derek's, which was, are there any particular problems for MOs where there is an elected mayor?
No, I don't think so, Derek. I've worked for elected mayors. And actually, to be honest, you get a clear line of thought, you get clarity, you do get, good decision making, you get good lead. But the ones I've worked with are really, good. There is no difference. You can be working for, in a committee style, you can be working in a directly elected mayor, or a executive function, a leader model. But what I think is really important is building that relationship with your senior politicians, and is actually creating that, trust in you and the confidence in you, that they actually will, trust that what you're saying and what you're doing is actually enabling them to deliver their manifesto, their corporate priorities, because that's our role, and which is really rewarding and challenging when you can see that you do make a difference. There are some mayors, and there have been mayors, particularly in some of the London authorities that I've worked at, that have been there 20, 30 years, and it becomes their domain. It's the way that they do things. And that sometimes can be really difficult if you're going to an organisation which has had a change of leadership, in the political leadership, a change of a leader or a mayor where there's been somebody there for many years, because that's a culture shift, and that takes a longer journey for you to be able to embed that change. There's 2 London boroughs that I've worked in that we've had to do that, and it's been a long journey, 3 to 4 years.
So it doesn't matter what label you stick on it, because if you have a dictatorial leader, in a one-party state, so an iron fist in an iron glove, that's what you've got. Doesn't matter what you call them, that's what you have to deal with. One thing to be aware of is that everybody is answerable to somebody. So whether it's a constituency association or a campaign forum or the national executive of their party, someone is always answerable to someone. Which kind of brings us on to.
Anne, did you want to pick some of the other questions? Or
yeah, we've got a plethora of questions, Phil. And I know that we're running out of time, so I'm going to pick up. Lisa's got a good question, seeking your best top tips for a new MO in a very uncertain time. If you could sort of give her 3 top tips in 2 minutes, that would be great.
You do yours, Phil, then I'll do mine.
Right. Okay. So 2 things is the resources that you need. And it's quite ancient now, but LRG in its former guises produced a monitoring officer protocol for authorities to adopt. I would always suggest doing that, because it talks about the resources. It talks about the fact that you have access to everything. No one can keep you out of anything, and that's signed up by council. But it also gives you the freedom that duty to report doesn't mean you do a section 5 every minute, because actually that's called a suicide note. It's about getting things done and allowing you to be creative in getting those things done. So having that intellectual freedom. The other is just remembering the skill set that you've got. I'm sure Suki has a top 3. I have top 3. The foundation is your legal or governance training that came with the original qualification. Useful, but not for every day, because you've moved away from that. The other 2, in no particular order, is political nous, because if you don't understand or have a relationship with the members, then you're not going to survive, because you need to know what's ticking in their heads. So they will listen to you, because you can shout as much as you like, and if no one's going to listen, it doesn't matter. But the other is having a backbone, because there will come the day when you say that's not on, and everyone else around you will go, well, that's not right, because if we don't do that, we won't save £1 million, and we won't do this, that, and the other. And you're describing it as, here are the parameters of what's acceptable, which are often huge, and there's lots of space to play in, and you can help people get to where they get to, but they need to listen to you. That's a very lonely place. So the absolute top tip there is have a network. Have people you can phone a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't reinvent the wheel. So for me, the 3 top tips, and I will be quicker than Phil on this because I'm conscious of time. Be decisive, be clear, call out poor behaviours. I also think you need to be strong and resilient, and don't just think that's just you, and have a good work-life balance. There's other people that will work with you. I think you should, also recognise a good sense of humour. It does sometimes help, and create those relationships. And the final one for me is actually, if you don't like the job, there are other roles that you can do. You don't have to suffer on your own in a job that you're unhappy with. And I've come across lots of monitoring officers that have. There's lots of different ways to come out of that. And then finally, my other one is understand risk. I think I come across a lot of lawyers and monitoring officers don't actually quite understand the risk appetite of a local authority. Get to know your local authority's risk appetite, and you will be able to then advise them accordingly. Finally, if you don't know the answer, even if you're in a chamber or in a committee, just say, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. I will find that out for you, leader, and come back to you.
That's more than
but I'd really underscore that risk. Just because something's challengeable doesn't mean it's not defendable.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question and really quickly, and that's not to say that we're going to ignore the rest of the questions that have come in. There's some crackers there, but they may apply better to the second part. I'm going to ask you the question that's been posed. Do you, because I know you wanted to talk about it and there's a difference of opinion, does the MO need to be legally qualified? Could I have a really quick answer so we can move on?
You start, I'll follow up.
Well, I have come across monitoring officers that are very good, excellent, that are not legally qualified. They have good access to legal teams and legal skills. I mean, they will have a lawyer in their back pocket, as we all have QCs and KCs now, sorry, beg your pardon, and, in our firms in our back pocket, they will have the resource that they need to. And that's that bit of understanding and managing member behaviours and members, because they understand the role of a councillor that's democratically elected. And I don't think you do necessarily have to be legally qualified. Phil?
Wow. Right. Okay. So I feel that's a really important foundation. You may have left that training behind, but it's a really important foundation. So yeah, like you, I've met good monitoring officers who are from a different background, but actually that background is sufficient. And I've met many legally qualified monitoring officers who are dreadful. But my comparison, there's the comparison to the 151 stuff. How can you really be expected to administer the council's finances without any financial training, even if you qualified 20 years ago? And the real comparator to me is as the company secretary. So if you're company secretary of a little family firm, no, you don't need to be qualified. If you are a company secretary to a PLC, you must, by law, be a chartered secretary, a lawyer, or a chartered accountant. And I think the same concepts come to here. So we are the general counsel and secretary to large and complex organizations, and we must have that governance training. And for me, I still regret that we didn't get the G in LLG to stand for governance in some way, shape and form. Yeah. So I would say a governance qualification, I would actually start with should be legally qualified. I see no reason why not. Even if there are good people who can come through a different route, that there are other management and roles, because this individual should not be the single point of the conscience of the authority. It should be all of us. So the fact there's MOs who are good governance, do governance elsewhere, I think this role, if it's going to fulfill that statutory function, should be legally qualified. How else would they know what the breach of rule of law is?
Though, Phil, the statute does not say you have to be legally qualified.
I think I'm going to move you on to the second part of your talk. Lots for people to think about and form their own view.
Thank you, Anne. So I'm conscious of time as well. So on that, as I said, I have come across good officers that aren't legally qualified that are MOs, and Phil and I, Phil and I will
get moved on. Stop it.
We'll beg to differ on that. Is that the other thing that I think is really important to know when you either you take up your role as a deputy monitoring officer, or always something out there that somebody else has always done. So always look at your constitutions, look at your protocols. I've go into lots of local authorities where they ask me questions and I said, well, what does the constitution say? And this is no plug for Knowles. What does Knowles say? Because I know that Phil's on the table, and they forget the basics. And they forget, actually, when you're clearing a report, do you have the power? Do you have the function? Is this your duty? Is this discretionary? All those basic things, sometimes we forget. And that is because sometimes a panic sets in and, you do go back to your foundations of what your training and your background is. And I do think that, understanding that the districts, what their role is, understanding combined authorities, that the whole premise of local government, I think, goes a long way. You'll be surprised. A lot of people are too embarrassed to say, I don't know the difference between a local government executive function, cabinet function, and a committee function or a council function. And I have come across that, in my legal team, which actually is no, disrespect to them. it's because we haven't gone through the basics. The inductions, I've gone to the local authorities where the inductions have just been about the finance, about some of the priorities, but they don't talk about, what is it that a local authority can do. And I think, that's one of the top tips for me is, again, get that ingrained, and
it really is.
line with protocols.
Well, when we were doing the ethical governance toolkit, and I was doing my LGA bit, we used to hawk around 2 courses to local authority members. One was called How to Make a Lawful Decision, which was never as popular as it should have been. And the other one was How to Remain a Councillor and Stay Out of Prison, which was really popular. But unfortunately, I didn't get 100% KPI satisfaction on that one after a few were interviewed by the police. I did once work for an authority where the police had turned up with a warrant and taken away the contents of the entire chief exec's office. So we had to send a clerk to the police authority if we wanted to get a file back. It was great fun.
Have you got some kind of indemnity insurance? Because I'm not going to be mentioning all the other things that
oh, it's all
just
all
in case
in the past. It's all washed down the river now. Look, in terms of the future, the way that some of this has filtered down to members can be a little odd. So I had one councillor say to me, well, the MO is a bit like in the film The Godfather, the consigliere, isn't it? Rather than the traditional view. And what went through my head was bits of that film where, so I'm supposed to cut off a horse's head and leave it in somebody's bed. And but what they actually meant, and it was a reference to startup companies in an article, and what they actually meant is they wanted somebody who would show them how to get things done, as opposed to forever be the naysayer. And this is not, and I think that's the bit, and that's the bit sometimes in all of this fuss that we forget is the really enjoyable bit, the thing we get a real buzz out of. And there isn't time today, but I did do a piece of work looking at the comparator between the monitoring officer and general counsel in companies, and it's so similar in so many ways.
It is. And the serve, you're absolutely right, Phil, in that, the future, where does the future lie? I think, some of the work that I've been doing is creating 21st century legal teams, so where if any of you haven't seen, the piece of work, which is quite dated now, but you'd be surprised again how many people haven't come across it. It's the skills that you need to work in local authorities, and that shift isn't just for planners, isn't just for housing officers, childcare, it's for lawyers as well. What do you need for the 21st century, which also is the MO. And I've seen a question actually in the box, does the monitoring officer, can they be the head of legal service? Yes, they can. And a lot of monitoring officers are the directors of law or governance and head of legal service. But if you're a large authority, you normally would have a head of legal, who is either the deputy monitoring officer, or some authorities actually, they can be the monitoring officer, as the head of legal, so long as the director of governance has got access to the top table. I digress. What I was trying to say was that I do think, creating those shared services, Phil, is also the answer. And I created a model where we actually outsourced all the legal team. There were 5 districts, and we actually appointed a general counsel. And what was interesting was that the members understood the general counsel role better than they understood the monitoring officer role, because they, in their walks of life, they understood what a GC was, because they would have come across that as, company directors or part of company boards. They understand what a GC is, and which was really interesting for me. And there were a number of
councils. Yeah, I did that role as well. I did the role for a local authority, and it was called general counsel. It doesn't fit because we're called counsel to the council, which does not exactly trip off the tongue, but all the bits are there.
But you could say I'm general counsel to local authority. I'm a general counsel to public sector. The GC. So I mean, I've been recently. I'm part of. Some of you in the audience might be members of this, signed up to Thomson Reuters Transforming Women's Leadership in Law. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a session, Phil, sort of on some of the, the rewards and benefits, which they haven't changed over the last 100 years for women. in the private sector, in-house, and also local authorities. If you think predominantly we are, there's more women that come into the sector, but if you look at the top table, that there's far fewer women, up there than there are, as in the authority. But that's a different thing. And when I was talking to somebody, they were saying, but what is a monitoring officer? They were thinking, oh, it's a planning officer, or somebody that monitors contracts, but when you say GC, they kind of go, oh yeah, I get that,
and
I think it
here's where
helps.
I think it is. I mean, just before we move on to what we need to do to get that next generation through, here's a few. I've just got a few quotes from General Counsel who actually say, and it sticks with us. So, my job is to identify problems early so I can nip them in the bud and fix it before it becomes a bigger problem. That requires me to know my organisation and what we're involved in. Many of the external lawyers who come to see us seeking work don't understand how fundamentally different our landscape is, and that's absolutely crucial for us, because it comes back to your thing of, if you don't understand local authority governance, then you simply won't understand the task in hand and how to get from A to B. And then the General Counsel is completely embedded in the organisation, vested in its success, can deal with an issue proactively before it becomes expensive litigation and impacts on revenue or damages a company's reputation or brand. And then the last test for me, someone said, if ever we wanted a test of how good we are at this stuff, it was, what's the greatest measure of success? And it's, do people want to hear what I have to say, even when they don't want to hear what I have to say?
Yeah.
And that's the political nous bit. So those things all coming together. But I guess the next bit for us is to say two things. Firstly, just how much fun it is. I've crossed over now to some call it the dark side. I say it's only slightly shady, because we're still supporting everybody. Is that I'll be back in 6 months because I'll miss the adrenaline, because I'm an adrenaline junkie, and there's nowhere quite like sitting in the mix with members, knocking all of this stuff about. So, so many of us, I think, really are addicted to that adrenaline and enjoy it. If you don't, it's not the right place for you, and you just need to test out whether you enjoy that life. And the next is how we get that message across. So how we use LLG and this and mentoring schemes in the firms and all of this kind of stuff, informal and formal networks and training. We've still got the local government diploma out there. Now I've joined as one of the examiners. May have been
I think that's
slight
a really good diploma.
slight exercise in masochism. How do we get LLG into that place where it becomes, the college of learning in the old-fashioned sense of the word, to bring the next people on?
I think on that, Phil, the succession, the pipeline, it's our duty as MOs. I think some of you may have heard me say this before. I do think, deputy MOs and MOs, it's our job to show a clear line of succession. In 10 years' time, you can be the director of law, and 15 years, you can be the chief exec. There was days, that you mentioned at the beginning, Phil, that, most trusted chief executives were from a legal background. And I remember some of my mentors, the chief execs were lawyers by background. Excellent leaders, excellent, in what they did, completely could understand, be pragmatic, find solutions, and then now, we have been demoted to third tier and most authorities, which we are, really struggling to get back on the top tier, just access to the top table. And it's interesting that the reports, the public interest reports, that the lack of governance, the lack of understanding what a local authority can do and can't do, is where those authorities have actually made sure that they've actually said that the tier, because of austerity measures, MO is a third tier. And that, so now in a way, out of the bad comes the good for us, because we are once again in favour, and I think we should seize that moment, but seize it to a point where we actually bring others with us.
Yes.
You
don't have to.
You don't.
You don't have to look far, do you?
No, you don't.
So
And there's talent everywhere underneath. You will have worked with loads of, I know when you left your last authority, you wanted to, your second command to succeed, and I wanted, wherever I go, I just want them to have, be the next monitoring officer. But it is our duty to do that, to create that succession, and we have to show how. And LLG is key, and podcasts like this, are absolutely crucial for people to have their lunch, walk, or they're going off on their daily duties. They want to learn a little bit more for their next job, their next role. Is those little tips. So I think it's really important that we keep talking.
It really is, and how we give that support. You don't have to look at the public interest reports to places like Croydon that just go, here were inexperienced officers in this role who were steamrolled. Well,
yeah.
How do we allow people to stand up? How do we change those views? My favourite ever cartoon that applies to us in some people's mind is someone standing over the cat next to the litter tray saying, don't you ever think outside the box.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's how some people see us, and it's getting us in there and helping us deliver.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that would be really good for us to do is that political awareness. I mean, I remember I used to, I was fortunate. I used to be able to go to the corporate trainings that, only certain levels, tiers of officers went to, because they were exposed to members. So they need to learn, they were learning how to understand members, who was the owl, who was the cat, who was the fox, all those types of, characteristics in politicians. And I do think that's something that's been seen, hasn't been done for a while. We focus on the MO a lot, but I do think we could just focus.
Before, because I know Anne's going to wind us up, something I think is really important is training sessions. This is great, doing all of this online, but in person, because you always learn more in the bar afterwards over a cup of tea than you ever learn in the lecture hall. And by not having things in person, not having an overnight stay at the weekend school, what have you, means you miss out on those networks.
We are so traditional. Weekend school, it's called a governance conference now.
Well, to me, weekend school's at a weekend. There you go. And I just noticed there was the question, where can people find the MO protocol?
Yes, there have been a lot of people looking for your recommendation.
I believe it's on the LLG website. It should be. If not, I'll be in contact with Helen a bit later today to ask that it gets put on. Because it is out there, and like I say, once it's a little old, it is still an extremely useful bit of kit.
Fantastic. I was going to suggest that we include a link. Yes, we've got a couple of questions that came through, and there was one that struck me. One question asked how an MO, whether an MO should accept lobbying, if you like, from an external charity about complaints in service on where EHCPs are not being complied with within statutory timeframes.
Just stop you there. That seems quite an in-depth, complex question that I think isn't for it today.
Okay, fine. And the other thing is, another question I wanted to ask you was, how do you avoid the potential where the general public are bringing things to attention and you want to avoid situations escalating?
How do they
if members of the public are if matters are drawn to the monitoring officer's attention, how would the monitoring officer know about those systemic failures, and how do you avoid situations escalating?
So what we can't do, and this is the point about governance, doesn't sit with one person or even the three people, because we're not going to spend all our days looking under bushels for things that may or may not go wrong, which is another reason why the word monitoring officer doesn't work. What we rely on is the organisation all being signed up to an agreed set of values, and some of those values just are inherent within working within local authorities, and abiding by that, and that will bring out those issues. And yes, sometimes, and Suki's had it relatively recently as well, are overall the culture of the organisation that needs addressing, and using all of those external resources of auditors and others to bring that about. In Suki's case, Max Caller, which is always an interesting approach to dealing with stuff.
Yeah, so absolutely, and I think it's really difficult because you can't be the eyes and ears of everybody in the organisation. That's why you have governance processes, procedures, protocols, and you should stick to them. You should be consistent in sticking to them. Have your regular statutory officers meetings. Have your regular, and that I mean by not the wider statutory officers group, such as Director of Children's Services, but actually, I call it SOB, which is the statutory officers business, which is the head of paid service, the 151 and the MO. So have that in place. That will, and again, you will be able to have your eyes and ears, everything.
There's also the corporate peer review challenge will ask, how often do those three people meet?
Yeah.
Just to say, what's going on and what are our problems.
And they hardly, in some authorities they don't even know it exists, Phil. And also the other thing I think that we forget is that relationship bit with if you've got, like where I am at the moment, there's more than there's 7 different types of groups. You can have sort of rainbow coalitions and lots of different political groups. You have to treat them all equally, but however it is depending on the resource, the site, the larger the party, the more resource that you're going to actually put to, because that's what you're delivering is their manifesto. But the relationship with the chief whip, the group leader, you have to have with all of them. You don't have it with one and not the other.
No,
and I have come across.
Yeah, members do understand, as Graham Queer said to me, our job is to help the administration administer, not the opposition oppose. And they all instinctively know that, but just need that reminder every now and again.
They do.
And I saw flash up. So Bethan Evans is doing training and really, really useful political awareness training for LLG and some monitoring officer stuff. We in the firms do a monitoring officer update as well, both at Bevans and I know Waitman's do as well, run a day conference for new ones. That's great. And so there is a lot out there, but there is a job for LLG to coordinate all of this together in some way. So there's our challenge to them.
Yeah, and I've just seen thank you, Phil. I've just seen somebody talk about section 5. I can't read the whole question because I've only got part of the screen here. Phil, sorry, I know we've only got 5 minutes, but I think it's really important to remember about a section 5 is that not everything that's been done in authority, which perhaps may be unlawful. They're minded to make a decision which doesn't follow a process or a procedure. That doesn't make it unnecessarily unlawful, therefore not section 5. So the recent experience that I've had in issuing a section 4, I responded to the 114 notice. There was no point doing a 114 and a section 5. So you've got to kind of remember that we all work together, and if it's the same facts and the same issues, there's no need for you to do a section 5. There is always a general discretion in the 5. It's a judgment call, not everything. If you haven't followed contract procedure rules, doesn't make it section 5. It actually is a judgment call. And if you look at the public interest reports, it was taking unlawful decisions. And sometimes an unlawful decision, it gets taken without even you on your watch. You don't even know it's happened, and the minute you do know it's happened, that's when your senses should chuck in, and that's when you should go to somebody that's trusted. If you've got somebody like Phil from a firm working with you, or if you've got some, I usually work with James Gowdy or Nigel Giffen, any of the 11KB. Other chambers also very good. You normally know who to go to get that quick advice, because it's a sense of judgment and you need the advice really quickly. So always have in your back pocket someone you can go to. you know, for
Well,
that quick advice.
Insert advert for said law firm. I noticed somebody put up East Cams have put up their monitoring officer protocol, and I just opened it, and yes, that's pretty much the one that was put out as the model. So there's a quick short circuit, but we'll get the original up.
Yeah, the other protocol that I really strongly suggest that MOs and DMOs getting is get a toolkit of how to manage member complaints. And if you give it to one of your junior lawyers and they can work through the processes and steps, yeah, then you know you've hit it on the nail on the head. Because a lot of the time that I've gone into authorities, I've inherited legacy protocols, legacy processes, which usually sit with the MO, and they go, oh, I think that person did it like that, or I think that person did that. That creates inconsistency. And if it's inconsistent, that's when members start to doubt, or they start playing you off each other, or they start saying, oh, your predecessor didn't do it like that. You know, if you have a toolkit of how you're going to manage your member complaints for officers, templates, standard templates, it takes the sting out of it, you know, because there are some authorities will have 2 or 3 a year, some will have 30 or 40, you know, so make your job easy. And there are toolkits out there. LLG haven't done one, I don't think, for managing complaints, for templates, standard processes, you know, all of that. I think it's really good to have. That's a good, you know, I've created 3 or 4 in the last authorities that I've been with. And it helps DMOs and succession planning, because you give them the investigations.
I know we're up to the wire.
We're right up to the hour, but I did promise Stephen I would ask him the question about the next edition of Knowles on Local Authority meetings. Do you know when it's going to be released, Stephen?
Well, when I get my finger out, what I've agreed with the Institute is that two things. The law hasn't moved on hugely, I think, to warrant, you know, charging everybody 90 odd quid for another edition. That said, I think there's a lot that can be improved within it, and I would really appreciate people's comments as to say, this bit's missing, this bit isn't answered, would you please address in the next edition? What I've been waiting for on you know, tenterhooks is the good Mr. Gove has said he doesn't understand why we're not allowed to have remote meetings. So I've been waiting for it to happen, and obviously that would be the absolute trigger for including all of that within an edition. So what I didn't want to do was have a new edition and then hot on its heels have to do another new edition, which might make, you know, the publishers a lot of money, but doesn't help local authorities.
Thank you so much, Phil. Sorry for throwing that little curveball at you, but
get my finger out.
To know.
I know. Yeah.
So it falls on me now to thank Phil and Suki so much for their time and generosity in sharing their experiences and encouraging those of you who are relatively new to the role to enjoy it, embrace it, giving you some fantastic tips for moving forward. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you'll join with me in thanking them very much for their time today.